Welcome, everyone. My name is Mitchell, and I'm your host from Canadian Geographic Education for today's presentation as a part of our 2025 Adoptship Program, sponsored by our friends at the Canadian Coast Guard. We're excited to be back for a fifth year of this amazing program that brings you behind the scenes for a deeper look at careers and educational opportunities within the Coast Guard and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. For all of our teachers tuning in, feel free to drop a note in the chat telling us where you and your students are tuning in from today. And for all of our students in the audience, make sure to stay with us until the end, as we've got a question and answer session planned with today's presenter that we will discuss from today's presentation. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our special guest today, Katie MacQueen. Katie is a radio operator with the Marine Communications and Traffic Services Department of the Canadian Coast Guard. Katie is joining us from the beautiful province of Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, Katie.
Hi, Mitchell. It's great to be here.
Well, to kick things off, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what it means to be a radio officer at the Communications Department.
Sure. So, as Mitchell said, I'm a Marine Communications and Traffic Services officer. And in Marine Communications and Traffic Services, we often use MCTS for short. So, this job is sort of like several jobs combined into one. During an average day at work, I take on the roles of Sydney Coast Guard Radio, the Maritime's Navigational Warning Issuing Desk, Canso Traffic, and Northumberland Traffic. And I'll explain a bit more about each of these, but our main role at work is to communicate with people at sea. So we talk to lots of different kinds of ships, big commercial ships like tankers, bulk carriers, ferries, and cruise ships, government vessels like inshore rescue boats, patrol boats for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Coast Guard ships like icebreakers and cutters, fishing boats, tugs, and pleasure craft like sailboats, speedboats, and yachts. And we even communicate with helicopters and other aircraft too, although our main focus is on marine communications. So our operations center is divided into two different positions, safety and traffic. On the safety side, the number one reason we're there is to respond if someone calls Mayday. And that could happen for a number of reasons, like a person overboard, a vessel that's sinking, a vessel that's on fire, a medical emergency, or a number of other reasons. And you could think of this side a little bit like a 911 operator for the sea, although lots of times people will call for help and it's not quite an emergency. For example, someone might be broken down due to mechanical problems, or they may have run out of fuel. In any case, when they call us for help, we take their information, we log it all in our logging system, and we pass it along to someone who can get them help. Most of the time, our first point of contact is with the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. That's where we get in touch with search and rescue services, and where they'll come up with a plan to send the kind of help that's needed for the particular situation. So we also take care of many other duties on the safety position. We do everything from radio checks to processing weather files from Environment Canada, sending ice and safety information to mariners, answering calls and emails with questions from the public, passing along pollution reports, and the list goes on. Work can vary a lot from day to day, and you never really know what might come up during the run of a day on our job. We issue navigational warnings from the safety position as well. These are like notices that let mariners know about concerns that might be hazardous to navigation. That could be anything from a buoy that's off position or not working properly to work that's going on in a particular area, like dredging or diving operations, or an object or debris that's drifting somewhere it shouldn't be. We're also responsible for granting clearance to vessels who want to depart a berth to travel from one port to another. We need to get certain information from ships planning to depart to ensure that they're operating safely, and they update us with their relevant information so that we make sure they get to their next port of call safely. These ships also need to report to us when they arrive, and they may need to check in at certain points in between, depending on where they're going. So the other side of the job is the traffic side. And here at the Sydney MCTS Center, we have two traffic zones, the Canso Traffic Zone and Northumberland Traffic. We call these high-level zones because ships need to report more frequently at designated calling-in points when they're in these areas. When they call us, we pass along any relevant traffic information to them to let them know what other boats are in the area. And we pass along waterway information too, like if there was work going on or a buoy that was off position or in lit, for example. You could think of this part of the job kind of like an air traffic controller, but the marine version. And because shipping is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year operation, we need to be two. There are always two operators on duty at a time at our station. There are 12 different MCTS centers across Canada, and some have many more people on duty at a time. But here in Sydney, there are two people on duty at all times. Because we need to operate day and night on weekdays and weekends and on holidays, we work a shift work schedule. What that looks like is two 12-hour day shifts, followed by two 12-hour night shifts, and then 4 days off. Although sometimes during your days off, you end up working overtime, but then you get paid more during those times. So you're compensated for working during what would have been your days off. Each shift, we spend half of the time on safety and half the time on traffic. So for your first day shift, you start on traffic. Then after 6 hours, you move over to the safety side. Then you do the opposite for your second day shift. And then it works the same way for your night shifts as well. Different centers throughout the country have different arrangements, but that's how it works here at Sydney MCTS.
Wow, wonderful. Well, it sounds like there's not too much that you don't end up doing throughout your job and on a day-to-day basis. So I was wondering, could you tell us a bit about your journey to the MCTS? And I remember you telling me that you were a teacher previously. What led you to change careers?
Yes, I was. So for my journey to MCTS, starting after high school, I went away to university. I went to Université Sainte-Anne, which is on the other end of Nova Scotia from where I'm from, 8 hours away. And that's where I studied to become a teacher. And also that's where I learned a lot of my French. I taught in the public school system for a few years, teaching junior high, so grades 7, 8, and 9. And hopefully, as you are students who are watching, you'll realize that teachers are very special people who deserve a lot of respect and a lot of credit. It's definitely not an easy job, as it requires a lot of patience and mad organizational skills. And after a few years of teaching, I was starting to feel like maybe it wasn't the best fit for me personally as a career, so I started to consider other opportunities. I did a couple of other jobs that were still within the field of education. I worked for Green Schools Nova Scotia, which involved promoting environmental initiatives within schools. I also taught French to federal government office workers who were working on improving or maintaining their levels of French for their jobs. And while I was working these jobs, I learned about an opportunity in MCTS from a friend I went to university with who was working at Sydney MCTS. And I thought it sounded like a really cool job and an interesting opportunity. So I went ahead and applied, and I'm so glad I did. It is a very cool job, and I'm really happy with my choice to change careers.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a very unique and interesting journey, and it sounds like you're very happy to be where you are now. Was
Yeah.
there anything specific about the MCTS program that made it stand out to you compared to some of the other options that I'm sure you were deciding between?
Yes, definitely. So since I had already spent 5 years in university at that point, and during which time I accumulated some student loan debt, when I found out that the training was only 6 months rather than several more years of post-secondary education, that was a major draw for me. Also, the fact that you get paid during the training as opposed to paying for it was huge. So by that point in my life, I already had a home with a mortgage, car payment, student loan payment, all the bills. So not accumulating more debt in order to receive more education definitely made it feel like a step forward and not a step back to me. And also the Canadian Coast Guard College, which also happens to be the location of Sydney MCTS, is here in Cape Breton where I live. I had moved away from home for university and for my teaching jobs, and I had always wanted to come back home to Cape Breton. So the fact that I didn't have to move away again for training or for the job was really important to me. It allows me to live and work where I want to be, and it's a permanent, full-time federal government job that pays well and has great benefits. So there were lots of things to draw me into MCTS.
Yeah, it really seems like it was meant to be.
Yeah.
And you mentioned previously that you work very closely with another colleague on those 12-hour shifts. And how does that dynamic work? And does it impact and how does it impact team collaboration and job satisfaction to you?
Yes, we do. So as I mentioned before, there are 12 MCTS centers throughout Canada. Some centers are much bigger than ours here in Sydney. For example, Halifax MCTS has 5 operators plus 1 supervisor on duty at a time, while we're a smaller center than they are, and we have only 2 operators on duty at a time. Most of the time, you end up working one of your day shifts and one of your night shifts with one person, and then your other day shift and your other night shift with another person. So you do end up spending a considerable amount of time with your colleagues and generally getting to know them pretty well. There's definitely an aspect of teamwork to our job, especially during the summer months here. It can get very busy on the safety position. Sometimes that person ends up working several incidents at one time. So it's really important for the other person to have the situational awareness to recognize when their coworker could use some assistance and help out to ensure the best possible outcome. Situational awareness is a very relevant term for our job in general. It's important to be aware of what's happening on both sides of the room, no matter which side you're working on. So when the other person steps out to go to the bathroom or the kitchen, you're covering for them. Someone needs to be monitoring the radios and listening for calls from both sides at all times.
So along with being very good at reading those 10 monitors in front of you at any time, I guess you have to be a people person as well. So
it's good to have some conversational skills for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the training for the MCTS is only 6 months. And what's the training like? And how do they get people ready to handle such an important role in such a short time?
The training takes place here at the Canadian Coast Guard College in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And since it is only 6 months, they do need to pack quite a bit of new information into that time frame. The training is a combination of classroom work and simulations. So you spend some time in the classroom and some time in each of the 2 simulators. There's the VTS, or Vessel Traffic Services Simulator, and then there's the simulator for safety, which is called the MROS. And some of the courses in the classroom portion are relevant to both safety and traffic, like shipboard knowledge, for example, and learning the InNav program, which is an operational system we use on both sides at our center.
Amazing. Well, what types of distress calls do you normally receive? So in that training, I imagine you plan for any and every situation. And what is the response procedure like? Are there any essential technologies or tools that you use that are required for this kind of work?
Yep. So as for the equipment, I took some pictures and videos to give a little virtual tour of our workplace and show you some of the tools and technologies we use. So I think, Mitchell, you can show that there now. And there are many different types of distress calls we could receive. That could be a vessel that's taking on water and sinking, a fire on board, collisions, capsizing, a person in the water, medical emergencies, and there are other different types of distress calls too. We often receive calls for children who are drifting out to sea on floaties, overturned kayaks, and swimmers in difficulty. This is a good opportunity to mention to all of you how quickly things can go wrong when you're on the water and how important it is to respect the sea and prioritize your safety at all times. And it's also important to know that most of the incidents we work are not actually distress cases. Many of the calls for help we receive are non-emergencies. A lot of the calls we get are from vessels who might be broken down due to mechanical problems and just need a tow into their home port, and we still get them the assistance they need to. So when we receive these calls, we have a series of questions that we need to ask, which will differ somewhat depending on what the problem is. The first and most important question is always to get their position. Then we need to know how many people are on board, we need to get a description of the vessel, and the list goes on from there.
Well, it's nice to know that someone's there to help me if I lose my pool noodle or get lost in my floaty. So,
Yes.
but yeah, so looking back at your journey, what has been the most rewarding part of your career with the Coast Guard so far? Is something really stood out to you that's made you be really proud of what you've been able to do?
Yes, it's nice to be able to help someone out. We get to be a cog in the wheel of the Canadian Coast Guard and sometimes maybe even play a part in saving lives. But even when it's just something like maybe helping out a fishing boat that broke down by arranging a tow home for them, it's still rewarding to get to help make someone's day a little bit easier, a little bit better.
For sure. And what is some advice that you might have for some of the students in our audience today who may be considering a career in the marine communications and traffic services? Do you have any advice on the college or your job in particular?
Yes, so my advice for anyone who might be considering it is to do it. It's a great career. The typical university path is not the only good option out there. If you're a bit of a night owl and you don't mind the idea of shift work, you do end up working longer days and you work nights. But then when you get that stretch of 4 days off afterwards, it's pretty nice. It allows for a good work-life balance. As far as what you can do now to prepare, it is a job in communications, so your language courses are important. Some MCTS centers are English only, but many are bilingual positions. So keeping up with your French courses would definitely be an asset. If you have an interest in geography, that would be good, as you would need to learn about the area of responsibility at the center you work at. Some basic high school physics might be good to have, although it's not a requirement. And typing is very important for our job. You do need to be able to type fast, but that's a skill that can be learned. I wasn't a very fast typer before I took Keyboarding 10, but taking a typing class can really help you to improve. And no matter what you do or don't take in high school, this is a career path that you can start on right after graduating high school. And it really is a worthwhile alternative to consider if you're not sure about what kind of post-secondary training or post-secondary education you might be interested in.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. And now let's turn things over to our student audience for our question and answer session. And if any classes tuning in have any questions, please just put them in the chat. We will make our way to them. I think we have one already. How many, from Ariana Townsend, how many emergency calls have you had, and do you have any cool stories about helping someone?
How many emergency calls? I have been here just a little over 10 years now. It was 10 years in November, so it would be tough to estimate a number of emergencies that I've worked. But to give you an idea of the number of incidents that we work over the course of the year, and that means incidents that include distress calls, as well as just, like I mentioned before, someone who might need a tow because they broke down. The number of incidents in this past year has been, I believe, well over 200. So it might range from 150 to 250 incidents a year here at our center in Sydney. And cool stories for helping someone. I guess one that stands out is once I got a call from a small fishing vessel that pretty much got T-boned by a large cargo ship. So we're talking about like a 14-meter fishing vessel that was hit by like an over 200-meter ship. And everything ended up working out fine, but that was definitely one of the more intense cases that I worked. I remember another time of working a distress case where someone was having a heart attack on a sailing vessel, and there happened to be a nurse on another vessel that was nearby. So getting to make those connections and get the person help. Those are just a couple off the top of my head that stand out, I guess.
Awesome. Have you ever had to spend time at sea for your job, like through any of the training or anything? Have you ever gone on a vessel somewhere?
We have gone on vessels, but there's not any kind of requirement to spend time at sea. Like we got a tour of, I think it was one of the Marine Atlantic ferries. Anyway, we got to go see a Marine Atlantic ferry, and we got to go out on a Canadian Coast Guard cutter out of Louisbourg just to experience what the other side is like. But in order to apply for the job, there's not really any experience at sea that's necessary. I spent some time on the water on the Mire River in the summers just for fun, but I don't really have any mariner background at all.
Nice. Well, it's I think it's a common misconception that every job in the Coast Guard requires you to be on a vessel somewhere. So having a firsthand experience of a job that is completely onshore is very unique for sure. And
Yes.
do you interact with vessels that aren't from Canada ever? Like, do you ever have to communicate with them?
Yep, pretty much every day at work. So there are ships coming from lots of different countries overseas. Sometimes they'll just be passing through our area, or sometimes they come to ports within our area of responsibility. So we talk to lots of different vessels from all over the world. Sometimes there's language barriers to have to try to figure out, but that's just one of the challenges of the job. And it's interesting to see where people are coming from, where they're headed to, what kind of cargo they're bringing back and forth. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah. And do you have to take part in any ongoing training for the MCTS program? Like, is there any kind of training that you go through on a yearly basis or anything like that?
Yes and no. Like I recently did some French refresher course training. So it was a 2-week kind of online just to refresher course just to get my French skills hopefully back up. We do use French at our job pretty much every day, but we use a lot more English than French. So it's good to have the opportunity to brush up on those skills. And sometimes there are other courses that pop up, like when we get new equipment, for example, there might be a train the trainer type of course, or other refresher type courses pop up every now and again. But there's not like a designated every so often you have to go for a refresher type of system. There's also like some mental health initiatives. I've done like gotten some training for trauma resilience training, which I then offer to other MCTS operators. So there's that sort of stuff that's available. So it's always good to get more knowledge and be able to share it with colleagues.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned so some of the training, is it very similar for across the 4 different regions in Canada for the MCTS program? Like, is the Arctic and the Central region very similar to the kind of the jobs that you do on a daily basis?
The job itself would be very similar. As far as training opportunities, I can't comment too much on maybe if they have different training opportunities than we do. I know, like, for example, in BC, I think they have some sort of marine environmental desk. So that's like a specific role and function to their MCTS center that we don't have at ours. And there might be um, like practices in the north in Iqaluit that will be really centered around ice there, and they're only open for 6 months of the year due to the ice. So one center to another, the practices will vary, but the job itself at a base level, like we still go to the same reference manual for how to do the job.
Right, that makes sense. And I imagine the Atlantic and the West Coast are a bit more busy with ocean traffic and things like that, but then the Central has all the Great Lakes with all of that traffic as well. So they all probably run into very similar problems that have to be solved for sure.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so another question we have. So you mentioned when you're speaking to vessels from outside of Canada and there might be a language barrier. What happens when there is a language barrier? Do you have to speak many languages, or do you have a translator that you call to kind of try and communicate with these different vessels?
So our station is a bilingual station. You do need to be able to speak English and French, but where there are so many ships coming from international waters, English is considered to be the language of the sea. So the vast majority of the vessels who are communicating with us call us in English. Sometimes they're not always the easiest to understand, so we may have to speak slowly or just repeat what we say. But usually you end up getting your message across and it works out.
Wow. Yeah, it's probably better that you don't have to try and learn 20 different languages. So
Yes, I would not
just
be here if I had to
again,
do that.
those communication skills come in handy.
Yes, for sure.
Another question here. Are there any ways that high school or post-secondary students can learn more about opportunities within the MCTS? Or there's certain job boards or tours or volunteering, or maybe how did you find out about it as well?
Like I said, I had a friend who was working here at Sydney MCTS. She actually went on to be our officer in charge now, so she's still here at Sydney MCTS too. And we're fortunate here in Sydney because we're located at the college. Oftentimes there will be tours that come through of our station. So if you happen to be in the Sydney area and you wanted to set up a tour, we could certainly set that up and have you come through and explain the different equipment a little bit more. As far as other parts of the country, depending on where you are, if you're close to an MCTS center, you might be able to contact the particular center that's in your area and see if they'd be willing to give you a tour. I know if you are looking for opportunities to apply, like after graduation, you can go online and look up MCTS applications and it will tell you if there's an opening to apply. There's a bit of a process to go through. You have to fill out an online application. Eventually, you'll be contacted for an interview, a typing test, and there's an aptitude test that needs to be done as well. And if you make it through all those stages, you go on for an interview, and then if you pass all that, you would be accepted to start at the Coast Guard College for the 6-month training program.
Wow. And so another question we have, what was it like applying to the Coast Guard College, and what was your time like while doing your training at the college?
I think I had applied in December, and then by the time I went through all those steps I just mentioned, like waiting the whole application process, waiting to hear back, um, doing the aptitude test, typing test, interview, by the time I started, it was May. There's also a pool. That's one thing worth mentioning. So, um, and another thing to mention, the aptitude test, if you don't pass it the first time, some people need to do it more than once, but you can have more than one opportunity. If you aren't successful on the first try, you can go back and do it again. The pool is like kind of a group of candidates that there's not constantly new courses starting. Since the course lasts 6 months, there'll be a new course. There was 12 people in my course. So once that course went through, then they'll have a date for a new course. So if you don't get contacted for the next course, your name sits in that pool of candidates, and then you can be contacted for a future course. So it might take kind of a long time, but then if you get selected and go through all the process successfully, you can start at the college when there's an opening for whatever region needs employees.
Yeah, and being able to attend college for free and getting paid while you're there is definitely better than getting a lot of debt and not figuring out what you want to do. So it's a great option for sure.
It's a huge advantage to be making money rather than paying money for your post-secondary education, and 6 months as opposed to, university can be anywhere from 4 years to, well, as to a lot more depending on what you want to do. So
Yeah.
it's definitely nice to be able to get checked into there so quickly.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. It looks like that's all the questions we have right now. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you wanted to learn more about the MCTS or the Adoptship program, please visit our website, as you can see on screen. And there you will also find a whole set of learning activities covering a wide range of Coast Guard activities and relevant skills. And thank you, teachers and students, and thank you, Katie. We really appreciate you joining us today and all the work that you do to keep Canadian waters safe. So thank you, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now. Bye, everyone.
Bye.